Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. Kyle, how are you?
I'm great, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing awesome, man. It's great to talk to you. I'm really grateful for for many things. I'm grateful for your time now. I'm grateful for your book, which I enjoyed reading. I'm grateful for all the things you've done for gymnastics. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I have a small confession. When you originally, when I got the book before, I was like, "Oh, I want to read this thing right now. I want to rip it cover to cover." But I was in the middle of a launch, and I felt so bad that I couldn't read it because it was like staring at me on my desk, and I was like, "Please, just let this thing be over." But when I did get the chance to read it, I tore through it in like 3 days. So very well done to you and Blythe, correct, and Coop.
Yep. Yep. My team awesome that surrounded me, Blythe Lawrence and Stephen Cooper.
That's awesome. What is, I remember you had a roller coaster. I've written a book as well. It is a monumental feat. And you had a roller coaster of like, you were all jazzed up about it kind of in the back of your head, and then it wasn't, and then it was, and then it wasn't. So what's the story of how did it actually finally finish?
Yeah. So the idea, I've always had it in my head and my heart, and it's always been on my list. Like I kind of keep my list of dreams or goals of things that I want to accomplish. And a book was always there. And I knew it was inside of me. I couldn't get it written. So I made a commitment. I just banged on the keyboard and got 80,000 words out. Just every story, every character, every little thing that ever happened. And I just tried to extract all of that from inside of myself. And then I reached out to Blythe. She and I had met in the gymnastics community, and we just had a great connection. And I really admire her writing. I said, Blythe, can you please read this and help me make this something? It needs a beginning, it needs a middle, it needs an end. And it's all there and it's all a mash.
Mm.
And so Blythe and I worked together. And then I opened a gymnastics center, and that took me away from it for a bit. And then Blythe went and helped Allie with her book. And so she went off track a little bit, and I had a family, and that took me off track. But finally, in January of 2019, I was like, I need to get this done. Like I got to dive off the diving board and just make a commitment to it.
Mm.
And so I would book little times here and there to go to the library to write. And then Blythe and I met up in Vancouver, and we did a 4-day writing retreat. And all we did was write and eliminate and add and talk. And we really sifted through the stories.
Mm.
And it's, as you know, because you've written a book, it's like, you can feel the momentum as you're coming to the end. And then at a certain point, you think you're going to be finished, and you're never finished. So you actually just abandon the book. You're like, all right, it's good enough. I can't read this one more time.
Yeah. Your eyes go numb, right? Just staring at the pages. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering, I actually wonder about that because there's a lot of stuff that I couldn't put in, different things I wrote. Is there anything that you really wanted to get in the book, that stories that didn't quite make the cut? Or is there anything like on the mind, like, oh, I wish that could have had more space? Or is you pretty much get everything that you wanted?
We got pretty cutthroat when we did our little retreat there in Vancouver. There was some stories that were important. One that comes to mind is at the World Youth Games in 2000, or not even 2000. It was 1998, and that was my first big debut meet, on the big podium. And I really wanted to include that, but it didn't have a place. It just didn't have a place. And so Blythe helped kind of like navigate that. She's like, okay, well, we can include one little story from it.
Sure.
And that's where I include the story of Horkina walking through the gym with a bag of McDonald's, because that's one of the things that really popped out of my mind at those games.
That is epic. Yeah. And it's actually, there's so many amazing things in the book that I highly recommend people read it for their own good, obviously. But one of the things that I was actually laughing out loud at is I don't have experience on the international stage, right? Worlds or Olympics, stuff like that. But I was so surprised by like almost the negative space, the time between competing, right? Because obviously from a spectator point of view, you don't see anybody, then you see all your favorites. And then you're like, okay, well, I guess what do they do for the next 4 days before I see them again? And so I was laughing hysterically, and I was listening to Jessica's podcast as well about like the casual beers here and here, like the walking through the parties and like all that stuff. I was like, oh yeah, they do have like 4 days to kill sometimes between events. So
Right.
I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, there's a lot of time. And at the Olympics, it's really challenging because, for someone like me, I competed on the first day in qualifying, and then I had to wait 10 days until the finals. And so that time, you just feel your adrenaline bubbling up. And I was committed to no alcohol, nothing during that time. So I had to spend a lot of time with myself and inside of my own head. And I can't in those moments escape. Like I need to just be in it. until the meet is done. At the end of the meet, I'm like, where's the beers? Let's party. But as it's building up, I have to like suppress the emotion.
Mm.
I just have to like be calm and quiet and present so that I can really rise to the occasion. So that's always hard, is those 10 days in between where you're sitting and you're waiting.
Yeah, and how in the world do you do that, right? Because I've had some big quote competitions in college and stuff, but never on that stage. But I know a lot of gymnasts who like they know this big meet's coming up in a week or 2 weeks, but like the days leading up to the meet are worse, especially inside your own head than the actual meet themselves. So how do you like push that back down? Like, nope, not yet, not yet.
You have to just remind yourself, and you can feel it bubbling up. Like adrenaline for me, I always felt it in my throat.
Mm,
I'd be like, oh, and I would feel that my body would start to flutter, my voice would get faster, and I just have to take the deep breaths and go into my journal to just like try to extract that
mm,
emotion of that moment. And I was really lucky that Kelly Manjak, my coach, he was the yin to my yang. And
yeah,
so when I would get really, I call it squirrely,
yeah,
he'd be there and he'd be like, "You look so good.
yeah,
Your training's going great. Just focus on your plan. What's the plan for today? Okay, let's execute that." And he would just try to fill my cup with that positive stuff.
mm,
And I think that really, really helped, because I was always the one who was on the edge of freaking out. And
yeah.
Kelly was always the one to like, bring me back onto earth.
Sure. Yeah. Did it ever
Yeah.
work the other way too, where like you were under ready? You were like, oh God, I gotta get going here. And he was the one kind of getting you a kick on the butt. Is it like the opposite yin and yang too?
Not particularly. Kelly kind of jokes. We did this transition in my career where as a kid, he had 99% of control. I would go and he would tell us what to do. And then when I was fighting for independence as a teen,
Yeah.
and him and I were butting heads all the time, but then we found that partnership,
Mm,
and it got to the place. Kelly always jokes. He's like, I never had to know what time the bus was coming or what needed to happen, because you
right.
always just knew, and you just like I was the athlete who told my coach what plan was for the day, and
Yeah.
and I actually really love that, because he gave me that sense of he totally trusted me to know that I knew what I needed to take care of myself, and he was just there as my grounding force.
Yeah, that's amazing. There are many subtopics in the book that resonated with me extremely deeply, but the rebellious teenager was 100% there because I had a phase, not rebellious like against my parents, I don't think, but more just against gymnastics, right? Like it was like all gymnastics up until like 12 and 13. Then it was like, oh, friends and social time and girls and some other stuff. And I was like, oh God, practice again. And it was hard to stay committed. I actually stopped for 2 years because I wanted to try some other stuff. But I remember like the instant feeling of, oh, I need to be back with my friends. I need to be having a structure. But can you talk about the experience you had with that, like becoming a little bit burnt out? Because a lot of parents and coaches listen to this podcast. I get 100 emails and DMs about like the 13-year-olds just don't want to come to practice. They don't care anymore. And I'm worried. And I think understanding that people go through it is important for those listeners.
Yeah, it was something that I don't think was even on the radar when I was growing up, because I was so obsessed with the sport and it's all I ever thought about. And I loved it so much. And then, yeah, around 13 years old, I was like, hmm, there's other things that are happening outside of this. And my friends don't have to go to the gym for 4 hours a day after school. I wanted to be quote unquote normal. I wanted to go to the 7-Eleven and smoke with my friends.
Mm,
And what I really value, and what I reflected on when writing this book, was that my parents let me have the choice. And my mom, you know, she let me take ownership of it. And she's like, okay, well, if that's what you want to do, then go do that. Like, I'm not going to force you to do gymnastics. And I learned pretty quickly within a couple days that just wasn't fun. I felt like a piece was missing.
yeah.
But I think so often we like just keep kids in gym and don't let them try to find who they are outside of the sport as well. And
Mm,
I think it needs to be a balance. And I think it is between those ages of 13 and 15, 13, 16, especially for boys. Like, that's a really hard time. Your body starts to change. It rebels against you. Everything that was easy is now hard.
yeah.
You're in the gym 20 to 30 hours a week,
Mm,
failing most of the time.
yeah.
And that sucks. And that's not motivating, and that's not fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't have the golden ticket, but
Yeah.
what I say is, like, let your child have a balance.
Mm,
That always is nice. And try to let them be in charge of their gymnastic goals. I think when that rebellion comes and someone tells you to do something, if Kelly told me to do 5 rope climbs, I would be like, I don't want to do 5 rope climbs, and you're stupid. But if he said to me, okay, Kyle, what do you want to do today for the conditioning? If I said 5 rope climbs, I would do it
Yeah.
intentionally. Like it would be with more purpose. So that's that weird phase where we're slowly shifting the ownership and the responsibility.
Yeah. As a
It's
coach,
messy.
yeah, yeah. As a coach and as a parent, I couldn't agree more with what you said because it is so hard to just let somebody, make their own choices. And I
Mhm,
think that is as a, I don't know if it's whether it's I was a gymnast who had this and now I was a coach and stuff like that, or if a parent, it's so hard to give the control to the athlete and be like, well, you have to do what you think is best. You can't make anyone do anything, especially a 13-year-old. And I think that's one of the biggest things a lot of parents and coaches struggle with is forcing them to do the drills and forcing them to do conditioning and force them to come to practice. And it's like, out of your control. It's something you talk about a lot in the book. It's like it's largely out of your control whether the kids come to practice. They have to want it for themselves, and I think that's it's a very deeper seated issue for many of the cultural problems that we have in the sport. But like we had an athlete who, after coronavirus came back, and she was like, I just don't love it, the way I used to, and I want to go to boarding school and try other sports. And she was our most talented athlete. We're like, okay, sounds great. We want you to be happy and healthy, and
mhm.
sure, we wish you would stick around and be with us. We love having you, but it's your decision, and that's really hard for a lot of coaches, especially.
Yeah. And no decision is permanent. That's another thing that I've come to realize is that I think if we stop doing gymnastics, that we can't come back to it, but you always can. And I think having, from a business owner perspective, always having that open door policy, like that athlete that you talk about who wanted to go try this other thing, allowing her to go do that, but also saying you are always welcome here and you're important to us and we value you and all we want is for you to be happy. So if coming back to the gym is going to make you feel great, the door is always open. Like
Mm,
that's a nice conversation to have because that child shouldn't ever feel the guilt of leaving. They shouldn't feel like they're letting people down. It's their life. They need to live it.
mm.
And we can't be in control of other people's destinies.
Yeah, in particular, I find that many of those gymnasts will not speak up about wanting to change their avenue motivation because they're worried about what their coach will think of them. They're worried about what their parents will say about them. They're worried about what their friends will say about them. And honestly, I can't think of one athlete who's had either a change in level, change in direction, change in sport that when they told me, and I was like, okay, that's great. Like we love you no matter what. They like a huge sense of relief comes over them.
Mm,
You're not mad at me? Like, of course I'm not mad at you. It's your life. Why would I be mad at you? But I think a
mhm,
lot of the perception from gymnasts is my coach will be mad at me, my parents will be mad at me, my friends won't, say something about me, or I'll lose my friends, which is a huge part of it. So
mhm.
I think you're right. Having that, it sounds like Kelly did that for you, which is like, and your parents gave you that air cover to make your own decision without feeling guilty about it, right?
And I always knew that they would be there.
Mm,
If I made that bad decision and they were going to be the first people I'd turn to for help.
mm,
And that was, I just felt that. And so creating that safe space for people to be able to fail and to
mm.
learn, that's I think we need more of that.
Totally. And I think the biggest thing I liked about the book, I was very struck by you had a range of experiences and coaching styles that I think you were exposed to. And this is something that unfortunately I can say I've had the range of experiences as being someone who I didn't like when I look back now, 8 years younger. I was that very hardcore, very like do as I say, very like this is the way it's always been, or like this is what it takes to be a gymnast. And so I was very bullish in that way, but I've since come around, thankfully. But I know a lot of people maybe see both ends of that spectrum. And it sounds like you had Kelly, who was much more of, I guess, in my opinion, the ideal, which is very transformative, very forward thinking, very collaborative professionally. But you also either saw or had interactions with some coaches who were maybe not the best examples. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the differences there and what you look back at now about like how grateful you are maybe for Kelly, because we all know, let's just elephant in the room, we're living through quite the culture change period now where we're trying to see these two different figures kind of battle each other out for success.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that, Dave, it's become very clear that you can have quote unquote success in both realms.
Mm,
You can have the dictatorship and the power and the fear and the control, and that can lead to Olympic gold medals. But you can also have the environment that's a partnership where the athlete has independence and agency, gets to take ownership of their gymnastics career, where it's collaborative, where it's nurturing, where it's kind, respectful, and you can also win the gold medal.
right.
And so that's why I wanted to write this book. I wanted to open up that conversation to say it can be both ways. And at the end of the day, two things can be right. However, when we look down the road, there's one thing that leads to a positive life. Gymnastic, it ends. Gymnastics ends, and there's life after gymnastics. And it's a failure of the system and of the people that contributed to it that there's women and men 20 years after their gymnastic careers who are not proud of their accomplishments and who feel like the system failed them.
Mm,
That to me is not worth it. there's no amount of money or medals that is worth someone being, in turmoil in their life after gymnastics and looking back and regretting that. It's that. So as we move forward, I think that there is a way to create I've been saying this a lot, but there's a way to create that demanding environment. Mine wasn't all sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows. Kelly was strict, and he held me accountable. He didn't let me go to the gym and do whatever I wanted. He was like, he enforced that I had to execute the plan, but I got to play a role in the plan. And another thing that he did was he would always let me know what was coming at me so I could prepare for it. He never just pulled the rug out from under me. Dave, I've been in every gymnastic situation. I've seen it all. And I can't stomach the coach berating and humiliating the athlete who's standing on the balance beam because she's afraid to do the back handspring series. That's not acceptable behavior. You cannot, as a coach, use your power over that child. Yeah, they might do it, but they are not going to feel good about themselves. And so there's a way that we can work with that child to build them up so that they feel really proud of themselves and so that they get the tools and the resources and the skill to be able to move in their life outside of gymnastics and be able to execute the double back handspring on the big beam that is in life without feeling like they need a coach yelling at them to do it.
Yeah. And I definitely want to come back to that concept of collateral damage, because as a medical provider, right, someone who definitely is on the coaching and the medical side in parallel, I see both, right? I see the long-standing injuries that after college, after elite careers are done, I'm still working with these athletes. So I want to come back to that. But and to skew this on positive, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as though Kelly, and you already alluded to this, is that he was very collaborative. He was communicative about what you wanted, but also he was not afraid to ask for help and get professionals around him to help him when he didn't know. And I think a major source of my frustration when I was a monster and I wasn't really doing things I was proud of is I would hit a point of frustration. And instead of taking a step back and be, okay, this is not working. This is clearly not going well. I don't know how to teach you this, or we're not connecting on the same, technical level. I need someone to help me. For me, that was Nick Ruddick, who was from the GB. I was like, can I just get some help? Can you teach me some things? And I taught him some things. And once I started having a lifeline for someone to ask for, okay, we have a mental health problem. Who can I talk to here? We have a nutritional problem. Who can I talk to someone here? A strength conditioning problem. What we can do? And when I had like prongs to send out and ask people for help, I was way less stressed as a coach. But all those little points of what used to be blowups and used to be boiling points for me became smooth overs. And is there anything else from Kelly besides those three things that maybe were also the reason why you were able to kind of get through that entire path to the Olympic level?
I think that Kelly, he knew that he was a young coach and he was hungry to help me and all of my teammates reach our potential. And he surrounded himself with experts. He reached out to Eugene Galperin, who passed away this year. And Eugene would come to the gym and help Kelly in the summers. Like, we would do a training camp, and it was intense, more intense than we would typically have. But they would map out the plan for the year. And they would create measurements and charts and stuff for us to be able to feel motivated to learn new skills and to track our accomplishments and to track our progress. Eugene really helped Kelly. I look at Kelly, so I'm 39 now, and Kelly was 39 at the 2004 Olympics as my coach. And I think of myself now having a 22-year-old athlete that I'm coaching at the games. And like, it's wild to me because I don't feel like I could be in that situation or that position. But Kelly was able to get there because he never pretended he knew it all. He surrounded himself with other people who knew more than he did. And then he just tried to be a sponge and tried to get all of their knowledge. He really believed in protecting his athletes. And he knew he wasn't an expert in sports psychology. So I worked with a sports psychologist. He knew he wasn't an expert in nutrition. So I worked with a nutritionist. He knew he wasn't an expert in sports science. So we had a strength trainer. Like, he wasn't trying to be the one-stop shop. And I think that's where I would like the sport to shift and move to.
Yeah.
The pun, the shift.
No paid advertising there.
Right? No paid advertising. But I would like gymnastic coaches have a great skill set. They're so technically gifted, and their role is to like empower these young people to become strong, independent adults. And I don't think a coach should ever be advising an athlete on what they should eat. I don't think the nutrition side is the coaching side. Yeah, they get in their courses, they get an overview of it, but like the expert opinion on it,
Mm,
I think we need to bring in the experts who have like a little less to do with the gymnastics in the gym training and more to do with like the actual science behind
sure.
fueling your body, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's the blessing and the wonderful thing of like the college model right here in the States is you have this great access to network of people you can work with, and that's something if I could wave a magic wand, I would love for people. Obviously, financials are a part of it, but you can still find in your local community or online, even virtually, everybody you need around you in your gym to be great. You probably need some good sports doctors, you need some sports psychologists or mental health counselors, some nutritionists, some strength and conditioning coaches, and a bunch of other people that if you have this on your team and you just have lifelines, like I said it's crazy because we know that's very beneficial for the athlete, but I know a lot of coaches who are very tired and very stressed out and very burnt out in this. They think that this transition through the safe sport model or whatever else is like a witch hunt all the time. But honestly, in my experience, by adopting that model that's more athlete centered and has these experts, it's much less mental health problems and stress for the coaches, right? Do you know how hard it is? And I'm sure you've experienced in many ways, but like trying to juggle all those things you talked about while still teaching Chikachas and still teaching getting lesson plans together and planning the meets and the travel. Like it's a nightmare for a coach to juggle those things. And so, well, yes, my first goal selfishly is to help the athletes. Secondarily, I'm not going to lie to people and say that I wasn't happier as a coach when I started, asking for more help.
Surrounding yourself with a team,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we need to do. Even with your show, we were talking before we started recording about the team that you surrounded yourself with. That allows you to focus on the thing that you're really good at, and that actually allows you to be better because you're not trying to figure out how to put things up on YouTube because you have someone
Yeah.
who does that, right?
Yeah.
So that is I think a big learning curve that we need to go through. And when you talk about the witch hunt, I completely understand from the coaching perspective that we're in the pendulum is swinging and we're in the mess of it and we're trying to figure it out. But I always try to tell people, be kind and be respectful
Mm.
to your athletes, treat them with dignity, and it will figure its way out. Like I can say, and I love my coach. I love Kelly. He's like a family member. I talk to him once a week. I hug him, like I high five him, but that's because that's my choice
Mm.
to do that. I get to provide consent for that. Um, but I think that if we are kind to athletes and we treat them with dignity and respect, we're always going to be on the right side. And it's tough. Right now is a tough time, but I'm so optimistic about the future that in
Same.
10 years, these conversations are gonna go like we're gonna have a really awesome tool set. We're gonna know exactly what the black and the white are, and we're gonna be able to navigate that easier. I think we're just in that figuring out phase right now.
Sure, absolutely. And I'm very empathetic to coaches, and I'm very empathetic to the fact that 95% of them are amazing people that are doing great, like Kelly and
Mhm.
many of the people that really are the model of what we want to happen. And like you said with Jessica, is that we want to hold those people up and give them a platform to share. But it's interesting to me that one of the striking things from the book for me was reflecting on how good your experience was and how great of an interaction you had. And the fact that when you got to the end of the road and you took some time away, you were like, well, what am I passionate about? What do I love? It's gymnastics, right? Like I still want to
Mhm.
get back, and it led you to opening a
Mhm.
gym. I was thinking a lot about what would happen if, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, maybe you got swept up into as you escalated the stage of competition, you got passed along to coaches who were better or more experts, and maybe on the national staff or something, and it didn't become what you had growing up, and it was more of that hardcore. I'm very curious if you think you still would have come back to gymnastics if you had a negative experience with that collateral damage, because I think that's what we're seeing now is a lot of the
Mhm.
whiplash effect of why it hurts so much right now. It's a lot of athletes being like, I'm not going to put my kids in gymnastics. And I really don't want anything to do with gymnastics because it's traumatizing to think about that. And I don't want to be involved anymore. I'm like, how heartbreaking is that to hear groups of my friends who are like, oh, I don't know, maybe rec classes, but if they ask for a team, I'm going to be really weary about, if my daughter goes in gymnastics. That's hard to hear, man.
Mhm. It is hard to hear. And I have a 5-year-old daughter myself, and I do ask myself that question.
Hmm.
Would I let her do gymnastics at a competitive level if that's what she wants? And I think the answer is yes. And that's why I want to do the work now. I
Hmm.
want to make sure that the tools and the resources are there and that the policies are in place and that the acceptable behaviors are created. And I know, like you said, 95% of coaches and facilities are good and have
Yeah.
great intentions. And I know what those are and I know the place that I would put her.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's very challenging. And I think that I look back and I don't think I would have survived in the sport if I didn't have Kelly as my coach.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I could do double AO on floor at like 9. He would spot me and I could do all the tricks in the book. I never was allowed to compete them because he protected me. He wanted longevity. And I know there's some coaches who coach from ego and they have their young kids doing double twists and double backs when they're 10. And that child never does reach their full potential in the
Mm.
sport and doesn't have the longevity. And so Kelly always protected me. And I was surrounded by a lot of great coaches, but I think someone could have taken the talent that I had and the drive, and they could have used that up. And Kelly kind of he created the environment where I could be nurtured, and I would prosper later in my
Mm.
career.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, because I've been fortunate to talk with a lot of Olympians and a lot of elite people on the podcast. And one common theme throughout all of them is something you said before, which is the parents were involved, but they weren't overstepping into like, how many did you do? And what was your
Mhm.
score and this and that. So that's a common theme. But the second thing, Sam Pejcik said this on the podcast, is that she's like, I would not have made it if my coach didn't protect me early on when I was like 10, 11, 12, and I had all this raw talent, but literally my bones and muscles weren't ready to handle double pikes and double layouts and Yurchenkos and stuff. And I hope that people can take away from this and many of the other podcasts that the parents letting the kids choose and being the ones that are kind of just helping, and also coaches not getting to that, 12-year-old level 10 and push, push, push. And I know college recruiting in the States is a different ball of wax, but like if you can protect them early through puberty,
Mhm.
really lets them set the stage for incredible things down the road as we see people 22, 24, 26, 28 years old at the Olympic level.
I completely agree. And I love that the narrative is changing. And that's a rule that I feel really adamantly about. Um, is telling media that are the 4-year media, it's not 16-year-old
Mm.
girls that are competing at the Olympics anymore. It's women. Simone Biles is 24. Ellie Black is 24. The Waver sisters are 29. You've got the average age for the German team is over 26. Like
Mm.
it is changing. It's changing right in front of our eyes. And women are becoming more strong, more powerful, and better at the sport and mentally stronger in the later half of their careers or at the in their 20s. And I think that's remarkable. And I love that. And
Yeah.
I wish that back even 10 years ago, that was the norm because it would have made the culture of gymnastics in general so much better. I saw a lot of young women who were really afraid to make mistakes and who were under the control of their coaches. And it wasn't a happy place all the time.
Mm. Yeah, and I think the best thing we can have as an example to go in a different direction is people like yourself or other like you said, Simone, and people who are older and are doing this. But I think the common thing I hear from young coaches and young parents who have kids who are in that age bracket is, but like I'm gonna miss the shot. I have to make, this national team. I have to make this competition. I have to stay on the radar of the high level coaches. And I'm always trying my best to share my experiences working with these high level athletes as like a consulting or medical role, but I can't speak to the coaching side. So I'm curious to hear what you would give advice to like those coaches that particularly have kids in the 10 to 15-year-old age bracket that are really good and are really talented and like, no, I want to make a national team. I want to get a college scholarship. I want to go to the Olympics. Because forgive me what year it was, but I know you skipped a worlds one year to take time away and just collect yourselves, and you kind of got some heat for that. And I think a lot of people have that. I've had people who have like skipped a season. Like, I just need to get my life together and get healthy, and I'll compete, next year summer at a championship or something like that. And they get completely bombarded by like people like, you're gonna miss it. I can't believe you would do that. But clearly in your case it worked out.
I think we all have like an inner voice that speaks to us, and we know what's right for us. And sometimes it's conflicting because the people around you can make you feel like that voice isn't telling you the truth. But like our inner voice speaks the truth to us. And I learned to listen to that quite early on in my career. And it's this heightened sense of self-awareness, just like knowing what my body needs or knowing what feels right in my body. And that was a learned skill. Like Kelly he wouldn't coach me with corrections. He would always coach me by asking me what I felt. Instead of telling me, oh, on that vault, you need to get your arms up more and reach back, he'd say, hey, what did you think about that one?
Mm.
And I'd say, well, I think it was a little low. I can probably reach my arms back. And he'd be like, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Why don't you try that on the next one? So he allowed me to start to feel in my body what the corrections were. And also he cared about my feelings.
Yeah.
And he would ask me, how are you doing today? And he would prepare me mentally for the big task that was coming up. Like when I was a kid, we would do 6 routines, compulsories on each event. And he would always line us up at the end of practice and say, okay, tomorrow we have this. So go home, sleep well, rest up, and prepare yourselves for this because it's going to be challenging, but you can do hard things.
Yeah.
And we would have then the incentive to go home, eat well, sleep well, and know the next day what we were coming up against. I think that's one of the big lasting things that I think about a lot is that Kelly, he allowed me to know what was coming. He allowed me to know what was coming at me. And he didn't just surprise me with things.
Yeah, and I think that I'm glad you said that about like 6 routines and the planning because and personally, in my opinion, I think that that's another error people think is that, you can't train hard, right? Like, let's be real. If you're trying to make it anywhere to a high level in gymnastics, it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging and it's going to be quite the roller coaster. And I think the only way that you can get athletes to be motivated and do that and doing that work is if you are clear about here's what we're doing on each day and I'm going to be right there with you and your work you have more potential than you think and I'm going to be very closely watching an eye on you and not let you bury yourself or getting like I think you mentioned in Jessica's podcast like there were sometimes you talk to him now and he's like oh yeah there's some stuff I pushed a little bit too much on and so he's reflective of what maybe he could have changed but I really want people to know that smart training is hard training right you can push hard and you can be really really aggressive and when I was coaching and stuff, like I would go really hard with conditioning, but I would do it with my athletes sometimes. So they see me sweat and dying on sled pushes. Like they understand the work that is needed. And in my experience, when you are clear about what's going on and why you're doing it, they're on board for it. It's when you blindside people and say like, go climb the rope or like, okay, let's do 5 more because I feel like you're not working hard enough. That kind of stuff, I think is when you undermine trust.
I agree. I don't think conditioning should ever be a punishment. I completely disagree with coaches that do that. You didn't make it, you have to climb the rope. Okay, what are you instilling right now in that child? Conditioning is a punishment.
Yeah.
It needs to be a gift. Moving your body, being able to get strong. Those are the conversations we need to have. We do this so that we can feel strong in competition. We did something called death conditioning. You can't call it that now. We could call it like extreme or like warrior conditioning or something.
Yeah.
But it was pushing our bodies and our minds to the limit. And that opened up a whole new realm for us. And it was intense. It was hard. Sometimes we would cry our way through it because at the end, when you're doing 20 swing handstand pirouettes on parallel bars and you just did 20 muscle ups and 10 rope climbs and you sprinted with like a 50-pound weight vest, you're tired and you're like, oh my God. But what it does is it makes you see what's available to you. It lets you stretch your limit just a little bit. And that is what makes sport so magical is that you can surprise yourself. You can go further than your mind thinks you can. That's very powerful stuff. And that's why sport can be so great.
Yeah, I have vivid memories of sitting at the bottom of a dip, just crying my eyes out as an 8-year-old and like doing wall walk-ups and my coach would be like, no, we got it, man. You got it. Like, you're okay. And he'd always shake my hand and he would always be like, hey man, see you tomorrow. Like, good job. Like, but he never made fun of me for like crying at the bottom of a dip, but it was brutal. It was brutal, man.
Yeah. Kelly in those situations would always step in and he'd say, okay, I'm here to help you with the last 3. And he'd spot us with like a pinky finger, but we felt like he was there with us. It was intense and hard, but he was like, I got you. I got you. I'm here to support you. You can do this. I know you can. Come on, let's go. Like it was that really positive, those positive words and just that energy. Like, you got this.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me. I mean, there's a lot of discussion right now around like, is Simone the greatest athlete of all time? I agree. And I think my always argument, I work with a lot of professional baseball players and a lot of other like, pro sports and stuff. And they always ask like, well, what makes you think it's that much harder for Simone? I'm like, well, you have the physical constraints and that stuff, but like the mental and the fear is so real in gymnastics. Like, no disrespect to anybody. Baseball, it's definitely scary. If you let people down, the fear of failure is real on the big stage. But like, you can't die, hitting the ball as often as you might be able to when you do like a 2.5 or something like that. Like, so that's always my argument, but that takes a special skill as a coach to help and kind of like be bumper lanes, right? So like when you see someone drifting too far outside of their capacity, like, all right, I'm going to spy on these dips, but also on the mental side, when someone's like really terrified, right? And I think that those learning how to be there for someone and cope with them alongside them, like social support is by far and away one of the best ways to help kids get through really tough times. And I think that's one of the biggest roles we have as coaches, as being there for them when they're at the edge of the limit and we're like, all right, we're going to bump it back a little bit, but also,
Mhm.
let's talk through this. Let's talk about this a little bit. And I noticed that in the book quite a bit. And I hope that people take that away when they read it.
I hope so too. I hope so too. Kelly never put I always say he never put me in a situation that he didn't think that I could handle.
Mm,
And if it was getting too much, for example, I did have a mental block on I couldn't do just a simple double back. I
mm,
would go round of backswing, full twisting double back. My brain just wanted to
yeah,
always twist. And in that situation, Kelly could see I was getting really frustrated, really nervous, and it was becoming dangerous because like you're doing a moon salto. You're defying gravity. And so he would always take the steps back. He's like, okay, I understand right now you are having a hard time doing the nice set before the double back. You just want to twist. So what we're going to do is round a backswing jump. We're going to do it 100 times. I'm going to stand there. I'm going to spot you. I'm going to grab your hips.
mhm,
And you're going to get your arms up. You're going to visualize and focus that you're doing the takeoff for the double back. We do that 100 times. And then it would be single layout, single layout. And then it was just taking a step back and reinforcing it, not yelling me through doing it. So that I was afraid not to,
yeah.
Yeah.
When does that ever help, right? Like yelling rarely helps escalate a situation.
Mhm. I'll never forget, I saw a coach once at the club that I grew up at. He got so mad one day that he kicked a chalk bucket and the chalk flew and the bucket was breaking and he was yelling and screaming at all the girls in the gym. And like that is ingrained in my mind forever. He hit red, his
Mhm.
elevator went to floor 10 and
Yep.
he lost control. And my hope is that no child ever has to like see that because
Right.
that's certainly not the environment that sport should be. That
Yeah.
should never be normalized.
Absolutely, and it's not productive. Like, I think that's
Mhm,
the myth that a lot of the culture has, is that that's required to get like squeeze all the orange juice out of the orange of potential, and that's how you really get like fearing someone into their most potential. Like some coaches have notoriously said, like they have to fear you more than they fear the skill. It's like that never ever works. Like long term, right? You might get a short term, maybe they make that skill, but you pretty much just buried the hatchet on being very resentful towards your coaching style. And I just, something that really breaks my heart is I've talked with athletes who are no longer at the gyms that they're at, but they say like they have anxiety attacks sitting in the car before they go into the gym because they're so worried about, someone's going to be upset or yelling, or like, it's not about the hardness of the practice. It's about like the worry of like, what's going to happen, like with this like powder keg of a coach or a parent or something like that today. It's terrifying for young kids to go through that.
mhm. And so the goal here is to eradicate that. Like
Totally.
no child should ever be afraid. You can have anxiety because you want to do well. Like
Yeah.
you're nervous about the day because there's a big test or whatever. Like we can work through those things. You should never have anxiety about the way you're going to be treated.
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's why I hope that people all take the book to heart, because like I said, you're a shining example of the pinnacle of the sport, Olympic gold medal, right? And in a way that is positive, transformative, and didn't break you down, but built you up over the course of multiple years. I feel like clearly Simone's showing it, clearly Ellie shows it, clearly you show it, like multiple
Mhm,
examples that I think people need to look for, to be
mhm.
like, what can I emulate in this to take into my own practice?
And I love that we're having these conversations.
Yeah.
I love the fact that I'm going to get to commentate at this summer's Olympic Games, and I'm going to get to highlight that because what a powerful thing,
Mm,
And no shade to commentators, but if you look back and you watch commentary from 80s, 90s, and just listen,
mm,
it plays into the whole rhetoric. It plays into the whole narrative of the coach being the one with the power and the control, and the gymnasts are just obedient and soldiers, and they're getting it done. If you listen to it, it's actually quite disturbing. And I think that that's just the way that the networks kind of that was the storyline.
mm.
Bella was the man,
Yeah.
and his little six pack. They were just there to make him look good. And I hope that we can talk more about the athletes and less about the coaches. And the coaches do work hard, and I admire them, but it's also their job.
Right.
It's their job to coach gymnastics, not to be the star.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up the commentators thing, because this is a nice little web of connections here, right? So something that Sarah on our team, who made a film about body image and about nutrition and stuff like that, and there was a snippet inside of the film that people like got a lot of emails back to us about like the commentators. And you mentioned this on Jessica's podcast about how you've changed this, about like not maliciously, but making comments about their body type or their body image or their muscular physique and stuff like that. And I know you have an experience in the book where one side-handed comment really put you down a dark path. And I've openly said on the podcast that I never had comments my way from my coach, but like just seeing my teammates being shredded. And I was just not naturally a very lean person. But this mixture of all of us who have to be more aware of those passing comments from commentators to coaches to anybody, that it can really lead us down quite a dark path, especially on the female side. So I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on maybe the change that you went through as a commentator, and then maybe share some insight into the story that you had.
So as a commentator, I'm realizing more and more, like I'm doing this like metamorphosis. I'm kind of like going away from it all and taking this big view. And like, what are those kids who are watching at home going to hear? What are the parents at home going to hear me say? What am I reinforcing? What am I highlighting? I'm so much more aware of the responsibility. I think now that I'm removed as a competitor and I'm in the broadcasting realm, and it's not my responsibility to ever talk about a woman's body or a man's body. If they speak of it, then I will take that quote. For example, like Simone has said, she feels like she is in the best shape of her life. And I will say that.
Yeah.
I don't want to comment on any specific things about her physique because that's not my place. That is not my place. As a white male, I do not ever comment on a female's body. That's just there. And I'm aware of that. But in the past, I have, as a commentator, gone to the place where, and I commend it because I'm in awe of the power and the strength and like the muscular tone of some of these athletes. It's incredible. But in a TV perspective, I no longer will comment on that because it just doesn't feel right to me anymore, you know? And I think that comes with having time and perspective and having a young daughter and knowing the way that I'm trying to raise her and what her values and priorities are. I don't want her to ever look at her body and think about her body other than a vehicle for greatness. I don't want people to tell her she's strong or skinny or fat or whatever it is. I just want her to enjoy her body and use it as like the vehicle. So that, I guess that's an example. I've also in the past as a commentator, I have called the athletes girls. And I'm really conscious of that because they're not girls. They're young ladies or they're women.
Right.
And I don't call the men boys. I don't call them boys. So why should I call the women girls? So just those little things, you know, and these are, I'm evolving, I'm learning, I'm growing, and I'm sure I'm going to make some mistakes at this Olympic Games as a commentator in terms of the language that I use. And in 10 years, I'll say, oh, I shouldn't do that. But I'm really trying to be cognizant and aware of the power that my words hold. Those athletes are going to watch their routines and they're going to hear my voice over top of it. And how am I reflecting them? How am I projecting them to Canadians? That's kind of the important role that I feel there. And in terms of the body stuff, like I think it's more prevalent in female gymnastics, but it is there in male for sure. Like that the pressure to be like really big, ripped, and to be really strong and to have not an ounce of body fat and to not be squishy, quote unquote. And I think in my circumstance, you know, it was said in a different language and it wasn't said directly to me. Like, you're out of shape. You look like you gained 10 pounds on the airplane. But when I became aware of what was said, because I felt the energy of it, I was being pointed at and made fun of. And when I asked about it, you know, it hurt and it did sink into my mind, and it doesn't go away. Like, even now in my life at 39, I still think of that. And sometimes I look at myself in the mirror and I do judge my own body, and I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to be 80 years old and still looking at my body, not thinking I'm like fit enough or whatever. I just want to accept who I am and be active and healthy, and like whatever happens, happens. But there's such a hyper focus on body types in gymnastics and being, you know, really lean and really strong that it gets ingrained in you. And so I'm trying to deprogram my mind from that.
I am the exact same way. And I've said this in the podcast that, again, my club coach never had issues with this, but mine was asking comments in college from an assistant coach who was like, hey, floor's looking a little heavy and, it looks like you've put on some weight, like I think we really need to kind of, pick it up a little bit. And that was it. That was it. Like he meant it well for performance wise, but like in my mind, it was like down the darkness tunnel. And I think what I heard from you in the book, and then also what I wish had happened to me was focusing on the performance side of things and how like, hey, you look a little tired at practice or like things aren't coming together. Like I'm missing routines left and right clearly because like I'm not in the right mindset. But we have resources or people that can help you out. Like, let's get a nutritionist on board. And I think your coach Kelly is like the perfect example of what he did in that moment was, yeah, I think we could work on this. I think this is something that does need to be addressed if you want to get to the pinnacle of the pinnacle and have the best shot at the stage that you want for your goals. Here are some people that we can help. Here's an expert that I can find for you. And from all the nutritionists who have come on the podcast, it's like the mindset of fueling for performance. And then also being like, yes, there are experts who can help you get to your peak level of what you want. Let's find these people and get a strategy in place, right? A completely different conversation than like, talking down or talking behind their back, something like that. Mine happened in the middle of practice. Like everybody was around and it was like so embarrassing for me as a guy to go through. And I can't imagine being a young girl who already has millions of people, saying things about them. So
yeah, the women definitely have more pressure on them for sure. Just in society in general, like every magazine you flip through. Oh gosh, it's hard raising a daughter, man.
Trust me, I don't have kids right now. I'm not married, but having coached so many young females, I'm very empathetic to what goes on. And in your case, right? Like you found someone to help you kind of fuel yourself. And I think you found that like, it was more on the performance side once you got a plan, but educating you and Kelly and everybody else was the best thing that could possibly happen because you're like, all right, now I actually know what to do to take care of myself. Right.
I felt so much stronger.
Yeah.
I at those Worlds in 2002, when this happened to me, I was sluggish. I was not in peak physical condition. I was not fueling my body for success, and I didn't have the tools and the resources to be able to do it. So that's where, yeah, when I came back and I told Kelly about the comment that was made and we went and started seeing a nutritionist, my gymnastics got better. And yes, my body leaned out, but it was a byproduct of like fueling my body in the right way and having the knowledge of how to do that and knowing what I wanted. I felt stronger, I was faster, I was quicker, I was more flexible, I felt more energy. And I also felt like really empowered as an athlete to know that I was doing another thing that was getting me closer to be at optimum performance. And that's like another kind of like I think of it as like a video game. You collect another coin for your superhero power. It's like you're a little bit stronger, and it just makes you feel even better.
Yep. Yeah. And then kind of a nice little pivot here is along with the, the nutrition stuff or whatever else, like you mentioned, you had a mental block and you had a sports psychologist you work with. I think that's another area that is still very stigmatized in all of society, but particularly in gymnastics is like the mental aspect of mental blocks or fear or anxiety. And you were, Kelly, again, is a perfect example of he didn't, shame you for having a mental block. He didn't put you in the corner and say, you're not worth my time. He didn't go through any of that. Right. And I'm sure in your position, like as someone who's super talented, right, he's like trying to get you to where you want to be. But it's so easy as a coach to discredit the mental side and just like throw your hands up in frustration with the mental blocker if someone's having some anxiety. And it's something that, I don't know, when you have a physical injury, you roll your ankle, you get hurt, you hurt your shoulder, everyone's instantly like aware of that. They're on your side, go see a doctor, right? But if you say, I'm feeling depressed, I have anxiety, I don't know how to handle this, I'm stressed out, I feel lonely because I'm at the gym all the time, I can't see my friends. For some reason, it's not like, oh, go see a sports psychologist or go see a mental health counselor. You're like kind of shamed for that and kind of like seen as like weak because of that. And so I'd love to hear your experiences with the benefits that you had from seeing someone to help on the mental side and, what that did for you in your career.
I'd actually like it if I could see my sports psychologist every day at the beginning of the day. I love it. I never leave feeling like it wasn't a valuable time. It's just like doing a yoga practice. It's hard to get there sometimes, and then you do it and then you leave and you're like, oh, I feel so good. Thank goodness I did that. It's a perspective shift, and we can tell ourselves these crazy stories inside of our minds. And working with a therapist or working with a sports psychologist, it allows you to just compartmentalize and to really like take different perspectives and views on the story that you're telling yourself. And I still work with a sports psychologist. I'm not an athlete anymore, but I still see the same man that I've been seeing since I was 13 years old. During this pandemic, it's been incredibly challenging as a business owner. I've gone to some pretty dark places, and I know that he's my lifeline. Like, I can reach out to him at any time and he can help me work through it. And he reminds me of my patterns. I'm a forcer. Like, if I want something done, I force it. If I want my gym to reopen because I think my government is making bad decisions, I'm going to call every MLA. I'm going to write every letter. I'm going to enroll as many people as I can, and I'm going to try to build an army and force it. He's like, sometimes you can't force things. And I need him to remind me of that. I highly encourage every athlete, no matter their level, if you are in a competitive sport, you need to have a sports psychologist on your team, because you need, number one, a vent. You need to have someone other than your coach and your parents and your teammates to talk to. You need someone that's a professional that knows how to give you the coping mechanisms and the resources to be able to move through it. And you need that consistency. It's the checkup. You have to take care of your mind. It controls everything. I can't encourage it enough. And you have to have someone that's a good fit, that you feel confident to tell 100% the truth to, and to be fully vulnerable, and to know it's a safe place. And it's remarkable how that can shift. You even look at a great athlete like Sam McCulloch, who's been very vocal about his mental illnesses, and has talked about how his therapist has played such a big role in helping him. And I sure hope at the Olympics he can come to that place where he's in his best version of himself in terms of his mental state. It is a very powerful tool, and every athlete should do it, in my opinion. Yeah,
I'm completely on board. I've been very vocal about that. Literally, before I came on this podcast with you, I booked 4 appointments for the next therapy appointments for the next couple of months. So like, I'm completely on board, and man, I couldn't agree more that like, it's something that needs to become normalized, because I've never met someone who doesn't have bouts of depression or social anxiety or stuff like that, right? Mine was a combination of my body image, and just like you, I still struggle with, I don't know if I'm looking super lean today, just things that were seeded in me from my young age, from gymnastics and other things. But just like you said, being a busy, business owner and stuff like that, like stress has come up, and I had a lot of problems with how much I felt responsible for Shift and to get Shift going 5 years ago. But my personal life suffered enormously, right? Like, I couldn't go out and meet people. I wasn't dating. I wasn't with my family. And I felt crippled by that, because I'm such a social person that at that moment, I felt like nobody understands. I'm the only one. I'm just going to hide in my room and just read and bury myself in work and block out and numb with as many things as I can, right? Like, everybody has a vice. I used to just work a lot. Some people go on social media. Some people are drinking. Some people are partying, right? There's a lot of different ways to numb yourself. But when you go to a therapist and you hear, oh yeah, that's really common. I hear that all the time from clients, and like, totally normal, right? Like, I was fascinated by your story arc in your life. Not that you had these problems earlier, but like from the early parts of like brutal negative self-talk and like just crushing yourself and like really distorted thoughts, to the end when you're at the Olympics, stuff like that, about positive encouragement and positive self-talk. And it's amazing to me to see your story arc of how that changed as you worked with your therapist. I was very encouraged by that. And I think a lot of gymnasts will take a lot of that from the book.
The book is called Make It Happen, because that's what I said to myself as I stepped onto the floor. And it was my grounding phrase. And I worked on that with my sports psychologist. He's like, what's something that you can say as you step onto the floor? Like, and he actually didn't tell me to do it. He's like, do you think that would work for you? And I was like, yeah, I think it would. He's like, well, and so we built it, and it felt right. And he was there on the day that I competed in the venue. He was working with the swimming team. And I remember him like taking off his hat. And he was like, yeah, he was so proud and excited for me. But he helped me develop that. And Make It Happen was something that allowed me to just feel strong, feel ready, and feel present. And then if you fast forward to 2006 Worlds, I was so afraid of making mistakes there. I had won the Olympic title, but I was so scared to fall flat on my ass that I was saying things like, don't screw up, don't screw up. And it's amazing how when you say don't screw up, guess what you do? You screw up. It's amazing. So yeah, Hap has always played a role in my career, and I don't think I saw him enough during that time. And then after, it was like getting back on track. Like, it's the reset for me. That whether it's every week or once every 6 months, it's just that nice, great reset that allows me to, feel a little more clarity.
Yep. And as coaches and as parents and as adults, anybody working medical providers, I think we have to treat the desire or expression to go to see like a medical provider or a nutritionist the same way that we would see that with a mental health provider, right? There's been kids on our team that, I'm not going to be here Friday for the last 15 minutes. I have to go early to get to a therapy appointment. Like, Awesome. Sounds great. Hope it's great. Like, let me know, if I need to do anything, I can help you out at all. And the other thing that's really important is, as you talked about with Jessica, is the role modeling aspect, right? I clearly see that your coach Kelly being open. I need to learn more. Let's reflect on what we did. Completely trickled down to you now, as I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to always be involved. But also that his willingness to learn and seek out help is probably what allowed you as a gymnast to reach and seek out help too. And I take that very seriously with my role with Shift and with stuff like that, is trying to be someone who is not afraid to say, I struggle and I'm going through things. When I started telling the athletes that I work with, like, oh yeah, I go to therapy too. Like, I've gone, for the last year, it's been very helpful. They're like, whoa, like, what do you mean that like you went to therapy? I thought you had this all figured out. I was like, yeah, you got another thing coming, sister. I do have a personal life. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on, but it's crazy how much more trust and communication opened up from my athletes. When I need help, I'm asking Nick for help. We don't know this about this. Let's find somebody else. Or, I have to take some time off, guys. I'm pretty stressed out. I need a day because I feel myself burning out. And like, when they get the air cover to do that and they see their role models do that, whether it's a coach, a parent, a teammate, it changes everything in the culture of your gym. So that is one of my biggest pieces of advice to people listening is, I think people view vulnerability and openness as a weakness, and it's really a strength.
I agree. I agree. I think that if you think of your life as a circle, there's a lot of pieces of pie that can fill that circle, and sport is just one piece.
Mm.
Your athletic ability is just one small piece of that. And so you have to fill all of the areas. That's family, that's friends, that's your social life, that's your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health. There's your career, your schooling, like everything needs to, and it's always ebbing and flowing. And sometimes some of those areas get depleted, but I always think of it as a wheel. And if everything is full and you are kind of acknowledging and putting energy towards all of the different areas and making sure that they're topped up, then your wheel is going to spin a lot smoother.
Yep, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And the only last thing I wanted to kind of highlight, and I had to do this because as a medical provider, this is tried and true to my heart, but don't want to ruin it. Clearly, you had quite a doozy of an injury that many people are aware of. And I think I learned, I love reading books that I only read nonfiction. I love recalling the events that happened through someone else's eyes, but also pulling out, how did you get through this? Because a lot of people go through this too. And clearly, I work with 20 to 30 athletes, gymnasts per month that are going through some serious tough times with injuries. And so I was fascinated by what you learned during that process. But in particular, the one thing was, you got a little excited one day and you went back and did some stuff that maybe you weren't cleared to do. And you found out very quickly that you might have had some stuff still to work on. Your knees were a little sore. So I would just love to end with that of, maybe, unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot. It's getting better. It's getting better. But I hear people encouraging those timelines for medical stuff. Like, maybe I think you can try some stuff. Or like, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand gymnastics. And it's like, well, there's a lot of science and good doctors for a reason that we try to be our best, but I think we're seen as the bad guys sometimes in gymnastics. The medical providers, the ATs, the PTs, the doctors are like the coach's villain who they have to work against, to the point where some coaches discredit sending people to, like, oh, don't go to see them. We'll just do our prehab here. But it's like, no, you're hurt. You need help, right? This concept of experts. I would love for you to share maybe the small lesson you learned when you went back a little bit too quick, and then kind of your experiences with the amazing medical staff that you had.
Yeah, injuries it's a interesting topic in gymnastics. It's one of those it's those no words that you don't really want to talk about, and sometimes we don't believe our athletes and that they're making it up so that they can get out of things. And I think also gymnastics is one of those weird sports where you don't typically actually get hurt doing gymnastics. It's silly things like stepping off the mat that you roll your ankle or whatever. I had my fair share of injuries. Kelly and my team always, like, it was ingrained in me to listen to my body and pay attention to the things and try not to ignore them. Sometimes I lost my patience and I would push things a little bit too much, too soon. And that always backfires because it actually puts you back. So I think the slow little, every day is an opportunity to make it a little bit better. That's the best thing that I learned from coming back from my injuries, was always a lot of today's add up to something. And you might be in today and it might not feel like you're getting anywhere, but in 2 months, if you do something today, just a little bit to get yourself one step further, and that might even be just sitting and resting, that that in 2 months time, you'll look back and have that perspective and know that it was worth waiting and taking your time through it. Injuries don't heal if you rush it. That's just the reality. I mean, I'm not a medical doctor, but
I
you
am,
have,
and I can confirm that. Not a doctor.
okay, there you go.
For you.
Yeah, and you just have to be patient, and you have to try to stay motivated, and you have to try to do everything that you can that doesn't aggravate. I think people always ask me too, how do you learn the splits or things like that? And they're like, should I just jump down into it? I'm like, no, 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 no,
Tear
no,
your
no.
groin. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like every day, this is what I always say, every day, do it and just be a little bit of discomfort, never pain, just a little bit of discomfort. And I think that's the path of gymnastics and life, is like every day you have to face something that's a little bit uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but it should never be painful, and it should never make your brain scream inside.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you pointed out very well, and I've become someone who learned this quite a bit, is there is an opportunity in every unfortunate situation. Like, yes, I can't move, my arms or my legs at practice. There's about a billion things that I can do. And the best athletes that I've been fortunate to work with, they don't sit around. They maybe have a period where they're really bummed and they go through it, but then maybe in a week or so, I'm like, all right, well, this is where I'm at for 2 months. Like I'm stuck with 7 more weeks of, I can make this the most miserable time of my life, and I can, go kicking and screaming and be completely upset the whole time, or I can find some way to make this an opportunity. And the famous story I've told on the podcast is my buddy Dave Durrani, 2008 team member, tore his ACL on the first day going to Stanford when he was there. So he was this coach like, all right, we're going to fix your crappy handstand. He's like, what? My hamstring's awesome. He's like, no, it's terrible. So he used that whole time to fix his handstand. And then sure enough, down the road, it paid off. So there is an opportunity there.
There's always a silver lining. You just have to find it. And it's also normal to feel really, really crappy when you injure yourself. Yeah.
Yes.
I think the power of gymnasts' minds often is that they can figure out the positive path. Kelly used to always say to me that that was my superhero power, was I would have a really bad day and I could figure out overnight by reflecting and dissecting on how to make the next day better. And I think that's all we can do, and accept the fact that nothing's permanent. Like, you might feel this way now, but you're not going to feel this way forever.
Right. Yeah, that's so important, right? It's okay to not be okay, but there's people who can help you. Totally.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, I could talk to you for 2 more hours. This is incredible, but I don't want to ruin any more secrets. So where can people find the book? Because like I said, I tore through it in like 3 or 4 days and I want people to read it.
Yeah. So thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate your support and attention. The book can be found on my website, kyleshewfelt.com, and you just click on the book link, and then it's all the retailers and stuff are there. So
fantastic. We'll put that up in our blog post and also send it out to our email list for you.
perfect. Thanks so much, Dave.
All right. Have a great day.
I will.